Good afternoon. My name is Yana Peel, and I'm truly thrilled to be here at Crystal Bridges on the very kind invitation of the Crystal Bridges team, discussing with you art in the digital age. Now, Maya Lin's presentation was a brilliant segue, I think, into the topic that we have at hand today, which is really the creation and appreciation of art that technology is impacting around the world. The focus, of course, is on impacts and insights from a changing America. And America certainly has changed so dramatically since that comment by the first Baron de Veen at the turn of the century. Europe has a great deal of art, he said, and America a great deal of money. Rather the other way, he actually said that, of course, Europe has a great deal of art, a great deal of money, and what we see from this tremendous collection is that America has a great deal of great art as well. Of course, technology as a tool has meant that the digital experience can now reach these audiences on platforms for people who will never have the privilege of stepping in the museum. And by way of context, this month alone, 15 institutions partnered with Google Cultural Institute to launch their exhibitions. And in a global context, that means that they joined 500 institutions from 60 countries that have brought 6 million objects online, as a reference 3 times the amount of objects in the Met. Now, our brilliant speakers, of course, are here to discuss this new context for art in the age of algorithms as perceived by a celebrated artist, a brilliant scientist, and a very visionary investor and philanthrocapitalist, if I may, Jim. Thank you very much, David Adey, Sean Gourley, and Jim Breyer for being here with us today. Now, your accomplishments are so extensive that to truly give you the introductions you deserve would take a lot longer than the 30 minutes that we've been allotted. So I will keep in the theme of this discussion and really leave it to a tweet-size introduction as I jump right into the discussion and hopefully encourage some confrontation and debate along the way. By way of a brief segue, it's really debate that also brought me here to this role as a techno activist and optimist, having seen the kinds of expansion that we saw with our live audiences of thousands for our Intelligence Squared debates to the hundreds of millions that are appreciating the debates online, on podcasts and different platforms. I really am so passionate to share with these speakers the idea that art is for all and certainly not for a privileged elite. So, artists first, David Adey. I hope you've all had the pleasure of seeing David's extraordinary work Hide in the collection. There's a wonderful app that Chad and I have gone through. It's number 925. And without further ado, I would love David to share with us some information about the work that's been so seminal in the exhibition, but also that's been so seminal in transforming his practice, which has taken him to international biennales and been covered by international publications the world over. So David, please tell us about Hide.
Sure. I have to say, though, that it's humbling to follow Maya Lin. She's been one of my heroes for many years, so thank you very much. I lecture on her work. Your solo exhibition at Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego a number of years ago looms large in my mind, and it always will, so it's great to be here with you. My work really varies in terms of the use of technology, from the painstakingly handmade to some recent work that relies heavily on new or relatively new technology, sometimes to the point where I'm not even touching it. I have a recent collaboration with a mathematician and an electronics engineer where I'm really not touching the work at all. But to speak more specifically of Hide, which is in the show, and I think we can get an image up there. So there's a detail of Hide, and just to give you an overall, that's the overall piece if you've seen it. So what you're looking at is a representation of a full-scale representation of my entire body flattened. And I don't usually begin with technology as the inspiration. In fact, I'm not really a techie kind of guy. I mean, I have an iPhone 4, which was free from Sprint. I mean, I use it primarily as a phone, actually, and a banjo tuner, really. So I'm not always on the cutting edge, but But I've learned a lot, and technology is maybe not the starting point, but it often, the idea really drives it. And this piece started out with something very mundane, as is usually the case for me. It was simply peeling a clementine in a spiral. And probably many of you do that. It's curiously satisfying to peel it in one piece in a spiral, and then you see when you lay it flat, that it becomes a spiral S. So the radius breaks and it goes the other direction. So that and a parallel inspiration was Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion map. I'm a huge fan of Bucky. And the Dymaxion map was the first ever flattened map of the globe where the land masses were not distorted. And what you see, looking at it from, again, going from three-dimensional to two-dimensional, is really that we all live on one big island. So that was a revolutionary idea for me. So that those two parallel influences led to Hyde and this idea of unfolding the human form all in one piece to see if that could actually be done. And it started as a very analog process with rubber. I was going to shave my body, coat it in rubber, and it's a long story, and it was a disaster. And I mean, it was an impressive disaster, actually, months of work, and then it dawned on me at some point that this could really be done much more efficiently and really much more poetically in a digital way. But I didn't have the skills to do that at the time. So I called some architect friends, some experts in 3D modeling, and got a little bit of information. I was going to have a full resolution 3D scan done, and I was going to have an engineer work with me. And then the short story is eventually it evolved, and I brought it in-house and made a 3D scanner out of an Xbox Kinect camera, the 3D sensor from an Xbox, and some open source software, and days and days and days of YouTube tutorials, and because you can learn almost anything from YouTube nowadays, and then began the process of this unfolding. So I created a digital scan, a triangulated digital model of my body, full scale, with over 75,000 triangles, and then through several applications, unfolded it and flattened it all in one piece. So it's really the same data of the expression of my form in space, but it's flattened. So you could take this. There's a detail. All the triangulated lines are still intact. You could technically take this entire piece and fold it and glue it and create a full-scale paper model of my entire body.
Now, I think, David, as we say the word data, I feel the need to jump to Sean, of course. And as we touched upon the impact of technology in the creation of art, we'll also go into its role as education and appreciation when we come back to you. But for now, with us we have Sean Gourley, who is, of course, the co-founder and CTO of Quid, a augmented technology and intelligence company. And Sean has started the first nanotech company in New Zealand. He has been a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, studying the mathematical patterns that underlie modern war. And Sean, yet you challenge the preconceptions that you are a scientist who might think that math is more beautiful than art, or perhaps robots more meaningful than Rembrandt. You've actually in previous conversations mentioned that art and technology are kind of doing the same thing, playing the same game. And I'd love to hear you expand on that idea.
Yeah, this is just justifying my ticket to be here, so that's the main reason. No, look, I think art and technology, for me, are two sides of the same piece. I think technology is definitely something that we create, and we create it, I think, to help us navigate through this world. And I think art tends to help us do that as well. It does it in different fashion. It allows us to kind of engage with ideas and stories and narratives. But technology, very much does that as well. And I think the mindset of the people creating technology and the mindset of people creating art are actually very, very similar. It just so happens that a lot of the technology has been created in kind of pursuit of money. And I think, perhaps, maybe not with art, but maybe a little bit less.
Not usually in my case.
So I think the motivations are a little different, but I think the processes are very, very similar.
And do you think that technology at the moment, as you see it, is there to solve problems, while art is there to open questions? Or in a sense, are you seeing them both trying to make sense of complex issues and moving towards the same goal?
A lot of the work that I've done with science and now with technology is very much around taking a multidimensional world and trying to project it down to a lower dimensional reality. And I think that you do that because as a human mind, there's sort of a finite capacity for understanding. And the world, as we look around it now with 10 billion people interacting, you can sort of imagine that it's perhaps beyond the comprehension of a single mind to understand the complexity of that world. So I think as scientists, as artists, as technologists, we create tools that flatten that down. And I think, to see, it was a beautiful kind of segue, to flatten down to a smaller space, something that we can actually engage with. And as we do that, we have a different sense of understanding that I hope we can use to navigate. And I think for me, a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is playing with dimensionality manipulation.
Fantastic. Well, I think Jim and you are doing very similar things, although perhaps from different angles. Jim Breyer is the founder and CEO of Breyer Capital and a partner at Excel. You've really been so proactive and visionary in identifying very early winners, as it were, taking them and broadening them out to new audiences, and also working with the most extraordinary institutions, from Harvard, SF MoMA, to boards of Meta and Facebook, in really looking for solutions and being at the cutting edge of what technology is enabling organizations to do today. Jim, can you tell us what you're really excited about as it applies to art in the digital age?
I'm happy to. First, I'd like to thank Alice. Happy birthday. And what was not mentioned, I had 12 wonderful years as a board member here in Northwest Arkansas of Walmart. And I see Rob and Jim and the families. I see Doug. And very often at those board meetings, I would perhaps offer a thought that we weren't moving quite quickly enough on the internet and mobile, which I think Walmart has addressed. So I did want to bring a new phone. This is the 6 Plus. And Doug, I'm not going to try to bend the Apple 6 Plus on stage. For those of you who don't know, there's a 6 Plus, Bendgate, et cetera. But this is a very, very fundamental new device for museums and educational institutions. And what I would say, and again, it's lessons learned. At SF MoMA, we have been closed while we're expanding for 2 years. At the Harvard museums, we are just in the process of reopening the FOG. And I was there last week after 4 years of being closed. And what we're learning is the mobile device really is the fifth wall. And so often people are confused, or it gets in the way, whether it's a museum, a curator, an educational institution, a business, about cannibalization. Does the mobile device or the electronic device take away from the museum experience, or does the mobile device, the interactivity, flipped classroom take away from the education experience? And one of the things that I'm so optimistic about is that these new devices, in fact, are going to make it wonderful as we look forward to enhance, whether it's crystal bridges, whether it's universities, whether it's artists, curators, communities coming together. I think we're in a very important and exciting time. Sense of place and a physical location like this is much needed today, 20 years from now, 100 years from now, I would argue. But I would also argue that fifth wall, the mobile device that allows artists, curators, people who are passionate about everything that goes on, this kind of exhibit will enable a new era and many experiments that we don't know how will turn out, but many experiments that will be really wonderful for artists, for curators, for museums, and I would also hope for educational institutions. And it all intersects in so many ways. So that's one of the reasons I'm so excited to be back in Northwest Arkansas. Thank you, Alice.
Now, as we take it back to education, as I feel so many roads today will lead us, It begs the question in terms of online learning and MOOCs and some of the things we're seeing in terms of artificial intelligence and the spreading of that education online. I was thrilled to see with the application and to learn from the curators of the exhibition that so much of the journey was in fact documented, will be available on videos, and will actually bring a community into Crystal Bridges that may never step foot inside the museum, although hopefully they will get here as well to amplify the experience. What I'd love to do is to turn to David as an educator and to look at his role as a professor of art and design at the Point Loma Nazarene Museum, and to ask how technology is enhancing or perhaps detracting from the engagement that you are having with students day to day.
Yeah, it's a great question. You know, I think in the last 5 to 7 years, I've noticed that students are coming in with on just a purely aesthetic level, more of a familiarity of contemporary art, just sort of the contemporary art aesthetic. You know, it's harder to shock freshman students with contemporary art. I'm not sure that that has led to a deeper understanding. So, you know, I still have a job, thankfully. But, you know, the series Art 21, in fact, I think has done more to educate young artists, because most of them are coming in having, you know, binge watched the entire series, so they're fairly familiar. So there's a good side to that, because I feel like we can start a little bit further down the road, but with all the blogs that they're on, and they're very familiar. But it's my critique of it, not particularly of Art 21, because that's more in depth, but they're on all these contemporary art blogs, and I think the work that ends up becoming viral is work that translates well to an image. And so that's self-selecting in a way. In fact, I even have my own personal example of that. If you Google my name, there are 2 particular pieces that come up that always come up at the top of the list, and I don't think they're not my favorite pieces at all. They were transitional pieces. You know, I still embrace the work, but they were transitional. But I think they translate well to a 2-dimensional image. So, so there's a downside to that as well.
It's interesting, when you do Google those images, they do lure you into the work to continue to look through, and they serve as an entry for some people who might not otherwise engage. When David and I had the conversation about how his work actually found the privileged place in the museum, he said, oh, they found me on my website. And so I thought it was interesting that it was really artists who did have that message to the world that were among the canon of those considered for the exhibition.
It's absolutely necessary to be online, to have an online presence. But you know, I'm a sculptor, really. I mean, Hyde is a figurative sculpture, is really what I consider it. So, you know, looking at sculpture online is like, you know, trying to debate with smoke signals. You know, it just doesn't lend itself well to the, you know, to the mode of communication. It can't capture the complexity.
Well, let's look for a smoke signal from Sean and talk about the idea, if robots take our jobs, what does artificial intelligence mean for the role of the educator, the role of the artist, in terms of having such a deep understanding? What is the potential complementary or cannibalizing situation there?
Well, I think just to riff there on that point, there was an algorithm that decided that this was the bit of this was the image that we needed to show you. So when you search for your name, and it comes back and says, this is the bit that I think is best for you. And of course, that algorithm is a combination of a topology of the internet, a network that's connected, and a navigation of that algorithm, coupled with a feedback loop of collective intelligence of people continually clicking on it, which kind of is an approximation, or Google's best approximation, to trying to figure out what's the best bit of work that you've done. And you know, you can kind of think of that as artificial intelligence sort of circa 2006. We're now 8 years later, and we've got a lot better than that. We can start to take all the pieces of art that are online and start to have algorithms recombine them together. And a lot of that will be kind of messy, noisy, junky, but some of it will be kind of genius. And we're going to know that because we're going to put it out, and it's going to elicit a certain reaction from the population. And that reaction may be controversial, it may be engaging, it may be exciting, but the algorithm will be able to self-correct and say, oh, well, do more of this or do more of that. And going through that process, it'll actually start to look much like the art that we're creating. But as we go forward, it'll be able to do things that we'll never be able to do. And you know, we think about what the AI in 2025 will start to do as we kind of train it up. So I think for me, we're at the very, very early stage of AI, and we're already starting to see it create things, start to create stories, create images that we resonate with, but they're ultimately going to look different to our intelligence. I think it's an incredibly exciting time to be able to go in and build that stuff, to be at the place where you can create an intelligence that can create art that moves us in a way that we can't move ourselves. So as we sort of think about what that looks like, I think it can be both very manipulative, but also perhaps very, very powerful. We could think of algorithms that would write stories that would implore us to move and save species better than perhaps we could save species ourselves from the stories that we tell ourselves. You can also flip that back and say, well, why do we need to save the species? We can create our own artificial intelligence that give abundance to new species. So there's all sorts of questions that we're going to need to wrestle with and regulate. But it's an exciting time, and albeit maybe a kind of a scary time.
Fantastic. Well, I think now, Jim, that leaves us to have questioned the role of the educator and the artist, question the role of the curator. With you, I think I'd love to question the role of the museum and what the museum means in the digital age. SF MoMA has had so much press around it in terms of what a museum is without temporarily a building. And while for 2,000 years we've gone to museums as exalted venues to learn about how we shape the world and how the world has shaped us, what does the future look like for the physical museum when 5 billion people will come online on their mobile phones in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I would say I'm a trustee of SF MoMA, but
Just
Neil and
conceptually,
Gary and
of course.
there are experts.
More broadly, in terms of the physicality and the
For sure,
externalities.
and I think there are some tremendous parallels between what will be the great museums of the next 50 and 100 years and the great educational institutions. There has to be an awareness that we need great physical space. It's irreplaceable. The James Turrell space, for instance, here is irreplaceable. There will never be an online equivalent. And there will be lots of educational, physical world campus environments, as well as museum experiences where that's the case. At the same time, this idea of mobile as a fifth wall, the idea that the great educators, the great museum directors, the curators, artists are all stepping back and thinking through what is the role of teaching going forward? How are students learning? At a museum, when we watch the 10 and 12-year-olds come through the museum, they might not come back for another couple of weeks. So 1 out of every 20 experiences for a student might be at the school or at the museum, but they're online 4, 5, 6 times a day. How do we build that ongoing sense of purpose and community so that students, artists, teachers are all at the same time being very much part of a social group and a community that is either Crystal Bridges or a university? And what I think a lot of the online digital initiatives, learning initiatives are causing, which is very positive, is a sense of reflection. For some of the great professors I've met, they're stepping back and asking, what does it mean to be a teacher in the next 20 or 30 years? When 90% or 100%, close to 100% of the students will be outside the physical classroom, and the student-teacher ratio, it may not be 1 to 10, 1 to 20, it might be 1 to 100 million in some cases. And that is changing the nature, I think, of how we study learning. What does a museum experience look like? What is a great museum, with quotation marks, over the next 10 or 20 years? And these are unanswered questions, but there's a lot of wonderful experimentation.
Fantastic. I think on that note, I would love to look to our community for some reflections or questions and to have someone with the mic approach the people whose hands we'll hopefully find in the air.
John Needham from New York. I'm struck by the contrast between standing in this amazing museum, looking at a 300-year-old work of art, and the stuff that comes at us every day on these phones that we're we're all in a battle to delete things that are coming in. And for me, it begs the question of permanence in the digital realm. How much, as artists move into the digital realm, how much permanence will there be to the kind of work that's produced and developed in that medium?
I guess I could answer that. Like I said before, I never really start from the position of technology. Technology is a tool that really is determined by the needs of the concept. But I'm not afraid to explore new technology. But the hope is that you make a work that transcends technology and taps into something that's deeply universal. I think if the work, and there's a lot of work out there that I think is primarily about technology. I'm not interested in making work that's about technology, because then when the technology becomes obsolete, then so does the work. But if you make something that is deeply universal, using new technology, then I think the work will stand the test of time. That's the hope.
And I think just to riff on that, look, there were more photographs taken in the last 3 years than we've ever taken in the history of photographs. Recording stuff is not going to be a problem. It's going to be recorded. Finding it is going to be the difficult thing.
I would only offer, there is no trip I look forward to more than going back to Florence at least once a year and seeing the amazing art, 13, 14, 1500s. And I'm also struck by how deep the intersection was at that time between the artists and the scientists, and how it was all one community and sense of place. I think what we're going to see for the next 5 to 10 years is some incredible applications on your device, John, and others. If you look at 82nd and 5th, what the Metropolitan Museum of Art has done with curators interacting directly with the audience, and the sense of community that curators are building with audience and museum goers, suddenly the walls are dropping, and I'm finding that people are just getting far more passionate about art. What is art? So there are the digital questions, but there are the social, mobile, everyday experiences that are bringing together, I think, direct interaction between teachers, curators, museum directors, audience goers from around the world that we just haven't yet touched upon. As we think back and as we look forward, some of these applications that currently exist are just terribly exciting to me. I get more excited about seeing some curated apps from some of the great curators speaking directly to me and then having an ongoing dialogue than almost anything else I can think of in terms of the more publicized, consumer-oriented apps that many of our kids and grandkids might be using. One person's view.
Fantastic. I think we have time for one more question. There's one just here. Chad.
Hi, I'm Chad Alligood, and Jim, I wanted to ask a question about what you just brought up, which is, Sean, you said something that scared me, which was that Google decided that these were the 2 best things that Dave had made. As a curator, I'm frightened of that.
Really?
And yes, and I worry that that perhaps that is going to put me out of a job. You were speaking about, Jim, the ways of integrating this kind of personal connection and some exciting apps that you had referenced. I wonder from the panel if you might speak to the ongoing role of the curator and maybe even that relationship between the curator and the audience.
Yeah, look, I'd sort of say, just to scare you even further, it wasn't just done to kind of choose that best bit of art there. It was done to optimize an ad on the side of the page that, we could kind of profit from. So, it's the nature of art today, right? But the algorithms that we use, they're trying to replicate what you're doing in some sort of simplistic sense. They're going to get better, right? They are going to get better. They're going to get a lot cheaper. Not everyone's going to have access to you as a curator. You're probably quite expensive, at least more than the few cents of electricity it takes Maybe not expensive enough, but you're certainly more expensive than the electricity on the servers that Google's running on. So I think it's more a question of, can we have our own personal curators in our pockets that meet and exceed the kind of abilities that you have, and can we make that abundant to everyone? And can we do that in a way that isn't treating us as products to be bought and sold by the ads on the side of the page, but are actually there to push us and change us and confront us like you're doing? And we have to, when we create the algorithms, we have to imbibe them with a sense of humanity, and not just something that be commoditizing us. And I think that's always the line to walk, because they do have to make money, but they don't have to do it at the expense of our minds.
I may offer, my view is the great curators are like, if it's marketing, retail, the great merchants. In the software technology world, the great user designers, the great teachers, professors in the university world. There's a celebration, it's a rare skill, and the opportunity, I think, for curators to have a more direct relationship through the museums with the audience is terribly exciting. And I think just like great merchants and great user design software programmers, it's a skill set that's very rare, will always be needed, and we all should be a little terrified of Google. I'm a little bit terrified of Google, but that skill set and embracing what many of the mobile and next generation technologies can enable for artists and curators, teachers as well, to me is very exciting.
Fantastic. Did we have one more question here?
Yes, I did. Yeah, I shaved my whole body, and my wife helped me with the Kinect camera to create the scan. Yeah.
Well, there we go. On that note, I just want to thank our panelists so much for sharing generously of their wits and of their wisdom to really show to us the role of technology in creating, communicating, and questioning the world today. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Wonderful.